The envelope arrived on a quiet afternoon, slipped under the door like it had always belonged there. Jonah Rowe noticed it only because it didn't look like the usual bills or flyers. Thick paper, clean edges, his name written in careful ink, as if the sender was afraid to rush it. He picked it up, already uneasy, and turned it over. No return address. That alone was enough to tighten his chest. Inside was a wedding invitation. Elena Rowe. His sister's name sat at the top of the card, bold and elegant, surrounded by soft colors and hopeful words. Jonah stood still, reading it once, then again, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes saw. 11 years. That's how long it had been since he had last seen her face, heard her voice, or been spoken about as if he still existed. The date was only 3 weeks away. Jonah sat down slowly, the past rising up without permission. He remembered a different time, when his name had been said with pride, when Elena used to call him late at night, asking for advice, trusting him without question. Back then, he believed family was unbreakable. He believed blood meant safety. That belief was what ruined him. 11 years earlier, Jonah had been young and confident, running a small but growing business. Elena had come to him with worry written all over her face. She talked fast, pacing the room, explaining that she needed help. There were papers, she said. Temporary ones. Just signatures. A way to move money quickly, to solve a short-term problem. She promised it was safe. She promised she had checked everything. Jonah trusted her. He signed. Weeks later, everything collapsed. Debt surfaced. Accounts froze. Partners vanished. Jonah woke up to lawyers, accusations, and a story that no longer belonged to him. The contracts had his name. The decisions were traced back to him. When questions were asked, Elena cried and said she had been misled. She said Jonah acted alone. She said she didn't know Dot in court. She avoided his eyes. The family followed her lead. No one asked how the truth could change so fast. No one asked Jonah what really happened. Silence settled like a final judgment. He became the mistake no one wanted to remember. By the time the case ended, Jonah had lost everything: his business, his reputation, his place in the family. Even when the charges were later cleared due to missing evidence, the damage stayed. The correction was small, quiet, too late to matter. Elena moved on. Jonah did not. He left the city soon after, carrying only what he could fit into one bag. New streets, new work, new name. For a while, he rebuilt his life piece by piece, slow and careful. He learned not to trust easily. He learned how fast loyalty could break. Most of all, he learned how anger could sit quietly, waiting. Now that anger stirred again as he looked at the invitation. Elena was getting married. Not only that, she was getting married well. The venue listed was expensive, the guest list long. The tone of the card spoke of comfort, success, and a future built without regret. Jonah laughed once, low and dry. She had everything. He had paid the price. That night, Jonah stood by his window, city lights stretching endlessly below. He thought about throwing the invitation away. He thought about ignoring it, letting the past stay buried where it belonged. But another thought pushed through, sharper and heavier. She didn't know who he was now. Elena believed Jonah Rowe had disappeared, that he was broken, scattered, or still hiding from the shame she helped create. She didn't know that over the years, Jonah had become careful, patient, and very successful. She didn't know that the world she now lived in had slowly, quietly crossed paths with his again. The connection wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic. It was hidden behind contracts, companies, and names that meant nothing to her. But Jonah knew. He had known for months. When he discovered it, he didn't act right away. He waited. The invitation was not a surprise. It was confirmation. Jonah folded the card and placed it on the table, staring at it like it might move. He wasn't sure what he felt. Anger, yes, but also something colder. A focus he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about ruining a wedding. It wasn't about shouting the truth in a crowded room. It was about balance. Elena had taken 11 years from him without ever looking back. She had built her life on his silence. Now, she was celebrating love, loyalty, and family, surrounded by people who never knew what she had done. Jonah wondered if she ever thought of him, if his name ever crossed her mind when things were going well, or if she had convinced herself so fully that her version of the story was the only one left. He picked up his phone and opened an old folder. Documents, dates, proof, everything neatly organized. Not to expose her lies, but to remind himself that he was no longer powerless. Jonah didn't know yet what he would do. But he knew one thing for certain. He would be there. Not as the brother she remembered. Not as the man she betrayed. He would arrive as a stranger, carrying the weight of the past and the choice of what to do with it. And whether Elena realized it or not, her perfect day was standing on the edge of a truth that had waited 11 years to be seen. Jonah arrived at the coastal resort early, before the guests filled the wide glass halls with noise and laughter. The place looked unreal: white stone floors, open windows, soft music floating through the air. Everything was designed to feel clean, hopeful, untouched by mistakes. Jonah adjusted his jacket and stepped inside, carrying himself like someone who belonged anywhere and nowhere. At the same time, no one recognized him. That was the point. He signed the guest book with a steady hand, using a shortened version of his name. It felt strange, hiding in plain sight, standing only a few steps away from a past that had once crushed him. As he moved through the hall, he studied faces, listening to conversations that meant nothing to him. People spoke about success, love, luck. No one spoke about loss. Jonah's eyes kept drifting toward Elena. She stood near the windows with her bridesmaids, laughing freely, her posture relaxed, her voice warm. She looked confident, like someone who had never doubted the path she chose. Jonah felt a tight pull in his chest. Not anger exactly. Something sharper. Seeing her like this made the years feel heavier. He reminded himself why he was here. 4 months Jonah had prepared for this moment. Not with anger, but with care. He had studied every legal detail, every possible outcome. He had learned how easily power could change hands without noise. The company Elena now partly owned, the one funding this wedding, had been struggling quietly. Investors had shifted. Shares had moved. Jonah had stepped in when no one noticed. He now controlled it. The plan was simple, clean, legal. During the reception, a public notice would be released. Ownership change. New leadership. Nothing dramatic. Just truth. Arriving at the worst possible time. Elena wouldn't be ruined, but she would be exposed. The world would learn who really stood behind the success she claimed as her own. Jonah told himself this was fairness. Yet as the ceremony began, doubt slipped in. He took a seat near the back, watching Elena walk down the aisle. The room fell. Silent. She looked happy. Not pretending. Truly happy. Jonah felt a flash of something dangerous memory. He remembered her as a child, holding his hand when she was scared, trusting him without question. That memory fought against everything he had built inside himself. As vows were exchanged, Jonah's thoughts raced. He had replayed this moment in his head countless times, always imagining satisfaction, relief, closure. But sitting there now, he felt none of it. Only pressure. Elena spoke her vows with a steady voice, promising honesty, loyalty, and trust. Jonah swallowed hard. The words felt heavy, almost ironic. He wondered if she believed them fully, or if belief had always been flexible for her. The ceremony ended. Applause filled the room. People stood, smiling, emotional. Jonah remained seated for a moment longer than everyone else, forcing himself to breathe. The reception began outside, overlooking the sea. Music played. Glasses clinked. Jonah moved through the crowd carefully, each step measured. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message from his lawyer. Everything was ready. All Jonah had to do was reply. He stood near the railing, staring at the ocean below. The waves crashed again and again, steady and endless. He thought about the years he spent rebuilding himself. The nights filled with anger. The mornings fueled by discipline, instead of hope. He had told himself that revenge was what kept him. Moving forward. Now he wasn't so sure. Elena's voice drifted toward him. She was nearby, greeting guests. Jonah turned slightly, keeping his face angled away. But then it happened. Elena looked directly at him. Her smile faded. Jonah saw it clearly. The moment recognition tried to form and failed. She knew the face, but not the life behind it. Confusion crossed her expression, followed by unease. Jonah felt his heart speed. Up, not with fear, but with clarity. She sensed something was wrong. Elena excused herself and walked closer. Jonah didn't move. He let her approach, let the past close the distance on its own. "Do I know you?" she asked, her voice polite but tense. Jonah met her eyes fully for the first time. He didn't smile. "You should," he said quietly. Her breath caught. The color drained from her face as understanding settled in. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, painful, real. "Jonah," she whispered. He nodded. For a moment. The noise around them faded. Elena looked at him as if he were a ghost, something she had convinced herself no longer existed. She glanced around quickly, checking if anyone was listening. "You can't be here," she said. "I was invited," Jonah replied calmly. Her hands shook slightly. "Why are you doing this?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He studied her face, searching for guilt, regret, anything that showed she truly understood what she had taken from him. Instead, he saw fear, not for him, but for herself. "I just wanted to see you," he said. "To see who you became." Elena swallowed. "I did what I thought I had to do." Those words hit harder than any lie. Jonah realized she believed them. She had built her life on that belief. To her, the past was settled, necessary. Jonah felt the weight of his phone in his pocket again. One message could shift everything. As Elena waited for his response, Jonah understood the real battle wasn't between him and her. It was inside him. He had spent years planning a moment that now felt smaller than the choice in front of him. He could hurt her the way he had been hurt, or he could walk away, carrying the truth without using it as a weapon. The music swelled. Laughter erupted nearby. The ocean roared below. Jonah closed his eyes for a brief second, standing between the man he had been and the man he had become, knowing that whatever he chose next would define which one survived. The reception reached its peak just as the sun began to sink into the sea. Golden light washed over the terrace, and the guests moved easily between laughter and music, unaware of the tension standing quietly among them. Jonah felt like time had narrowed. pulling everything toward a single moment. His phone vibrated again. The message was short, clear, final, waiting on your signal. Jonah slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying. His pulse was steady, but his thoughts were not. He watched servers move through the crowd, watched glasses fill and empty, watched happiness unfold as if it were fragile and untouchable. This was the moment he had imagined for years. The edge of the cliff. The point of no return. Elena stepped onto the small stage, taking the microphone for her speech. The crowd quieted. Jonah stood near the back, half in shadow, close enough to hear every word. She spoke about love, about second chances, about how life tested people and forced them to make hard choices. Her voice didn't shake. She sounded confident, certain of her story. Jonah felt each sentence press against him, not as an attack, but as a reminder. She never once said his name. Jonah's fingers brushed the folded documents inside his jacket. They felt heavier now, like they carried more than paper. They carried consequences. He imagined the announcement going out mid-speech. Phones lighting up, faces changing, whispers spreading faster than music. Elena's smile would freeze. Room would turn cold. Jonah told himself she deserved it, that this wasn't cruelty, that truth finally stepping into the light, that he owed himself this moment. But another thought followed, quiet and sharp. What happens after? Elena finished her speech to loud applause. She stepped down, relieved, glowing, surrounded by people who loved her without question. Jonah saw her breathe out, the way someone does when they believe the hardest part is over. She looked toward him again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight to him, her steps controlled but urgent. Jonah knew she wouldn't let this wait. They stood near the edge of the terrace, the sea far below them, the noise of the party just loud enough to hide their words. "Please," Elena said, her voice low. "Tell me why you're here." Jonah studied her face. Up close, he saw lines that hadn't been there before. Pressure marks left by years of holding things together. She wasn't the careless sister from his memories. She was someone who had built a life and protected it fiercely. "I wanted to see if you remembered," Jonah said. "I remember," she replied quickly. "Every day." He searched her eyes. "Then why did you never reach out?" Elena hesitated, just for a second. That pause told him everything. "Because some doors," she said softly, "can't be reopened without everything falling apart." Jonah felt the truth of that settle between them. She wasn't denying what she did. She wasn't apologizing either. In her mind, the past was a closed chapter that had to stay buried for the present to survive. "You chose yourself," Jonah said. "I chose what I thought would save us," Elena answered. "I thought you'd recover. You always did." That hurt more than anger ever had. Jonah realized she had never imagined a world where he didn't land on his feet. His pain had been invisible because she believed he was strong enough to carry it. Jonah looked past her at the crowd, at the joy, at the future unfolding behind her. He imagined tearing it all apart. For the first time, he understood how easy revenge really was. It didn't require strength. It required permission. And he had already given himself that permission years ago. His phone vibrated again. Jonah took it out. Elena's breath caught. "What are you doing?" He unlocked the screen and read the message once more. He could feel the moment stretching thin, ready to snap. "This," Jonah said calmly, "is where I decide who I am." Elena's voice trembled. "If this is about punishment, I've lived with it. If it's about money, take it. Just don't do this here. Not today. Jonah looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something unexpected. Fear, yes. But also exhaustion. She had been running for years, holding everything together with the belief that what she did was necessary. Jonah realized that destroying her publicly wouldn't give him peace. It would only tie him to her choices forever. Revenge would make him part of her story again. He didn't want that. Jonah typed a short message. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long second. Then he sent it. Elena watched his face, trying to read it. "What did you do?" she asked. "I changed my mind," Jonah said. Her eyes widened. "About what?" "About how this ends." Jonah slipped the phone back into his pocket. The documents stayed where they were. Unused. Silent. Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly, relief mixing with confusion. "Why?" she asked. "After everything?" Jonah exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't survive all this just to become someone who needs to hurt you to feel whole." They stood there as the music swelled again. The moment passed, unnoticed by everyone else. Jonah turned away first. He walked through the crowd, each step lighter than the last. No one stopped him. No one knew what almost happened. The night continued exactly as planned. As Jonah reached the exit, he paused once, listening to the laughter behind him. He felt no victory, no loss, only clarity. The hardest part of revenge, he realized, isn't carrying it out. It's knowing when to let it go. Jonah left the resort without looking back. The music faded behind him, replaced by the steady sound of the waves below the cliff. His car waited at the edge of the long driveway, dusted with salt from the sea air. As he drove away, he expected to feel empty or unsure. Instead, his mind felt clear for the first time in years. The night passed without sleep. Jonah sat in his hotel room, watching the city lights flicker beyond the window. He replayed the wedding in his head, not with anger, but with distance. The moment he chose not to strike felt heavier now, but also cleaner. He understood something important. Power didn't come from exposure. It came from control over his own choices. At sunrise, his phone buzzed. A message from Elena. It was short. "Careful. I didn't know how to face you. I'm sorry for what I cost you." Jonah read it once and set the phone down. He didn't reply right away. Apologies arrived differently when time had already taken so much. He needed to be honest with himself before answering her. Later that morning, Jonah met with his legal team. The room was quiet, businesslike. Contracts lay open across the table. This was the part no one else would ever see. Jonah signed where needed, making changes that would take effect slowly, but permanently. He restored his name. The company Elena was part of would be restructured, publicly and lawfully. Records would reflect the truth, not as punishment but as correction. No announcements, no spectacle, just facts placed where they belonged. By the time news reached Elena, it would be impossible to deny, but impossible to dramatize. That was the balance Jonah chose. Days later, Jonah returned to his city. Life resumed its pace. Meetings, deadlines, quiet evenings. Yet something inside him had shifted. The weight he had carried for years no longer sat on his chest. Letting go hadn't erased the past, but it had loosened its grip. Elena reached out again, this time asking to talk. They met in a small cafe, neutral ground, far from family and memory. She looked different without the wedding glow. Tired, thoughtful, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Never thought you'd come," she said. "I didn't plan to," Jonah replied. They spoke carefully at first, about safe things, time, distance, the world changing. Then Elena's voice grew quieter. I told myself you were strong, she said. That you'd rebuild. I used that to justify everything. Jonah nodded. I did rebuild. But strength doesn't cancel pain. Elena lowered her eyes. I know. There were no tears. No dramatic apologies. Just understanding settling slowly between them. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revenge. It was acceptance of what could not be undone. When they parted, Jonah felt no urge to look back. Weeks turned into months. Jonah focused on his work, not to escape, but to move forward. The company grew. His reputation followed. Quiet respect replaced the old whispers that once surrounded his name. Elena adjusted too. The truth changed her world, though not in the way Jonah once imagined. Doors didn't slam shut. Instead, they became harder to open. People asked careful questions. Trust required proof now. She learned what it meant to live with consequences without being destroyed by them. One evening, Jonah stood on his balcony, watching the city settle into night. He thought about the man he had been when the invitation arrived. Angry. Focused on a single moment of release. He was grateful he hadn't followed that path. Revenge. He realized, promises relief but delivers attachment. It ties you forever to the moment you refuse to outgrow. Justice, when chosen with restraint, allows distance. It lets life continue. Jonah never returned to the wedding venue. He never asked about photos or memories from that day. It belonged to a chapter he no longer needed to revisit. What mattered was this. He had faced the past without letting it define his future. And in doing so, he learned that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the strongest ending of all.